Let me tell you a story that begins not with roaring crowds or glittering trophies, but with silence. Silence so deep, you can almost hear the dust settling in the rafters. A story shaped not by drama, but by discipline, not by bold declarations, but by whispers. Imagine a gymnasium empty, the kind older than its bones, holding the smell of leather and hardwood in its breath. It's long past practice, long before sunrise. The moon slips in through a high window, drawing silver lines across the worn oak floor, and somewhere, faintly, a single basketball dribbles once. Then again, the echo rings hollow and low, like a memory gently stirred. This is where greatness hides, in between the noise. Because this isn't the story of flash or fame. This is the story of something quieter, something steadier. The story of VanDerveer. You may not know the name like you know others. Not like Gino, not like Pat, not like Patia, Coach K, but listen long enough, and you begin to hear the shape of her legacy. It does not demand attention. Instead, it teaches patience. It teaches persistence. It teaches that dynasties do not need to roar. Sometimes they whisper a coaching record more vast than any other. Over 1,200 victories, national championships, and Olympic gold. Players transformed into legends. And yet, to her, it's always been about the little things. Because you see, for Tara, basketball is not just a game. It's not even a career. It's something else entirely. A philosophy composed quietly, one practice at a time. She never chased lights. She never needed them. Instead, her genius has always unfolded like a paper crane, methodical, elegant, and precise. She builds empires with chalk and film, with discipline and repetition. Empires that stand calmly against the rushing tide of time, and yet, even in her greatness, she remains unseen by many, not because the light never found her, but because she never asked for it. Basketball has stories that shout, that glorify calamity, conflict, and conquest. But this is a story that breathes softly, that holds weight like a winter coat. Warm, heavy, lasting. When the world wanted noise, Tara gave it patience. When the world wanted spectacle, she answered with study. Coach Summit had the ferocity. Coach K had the camera. But Tara, she had silence, and inside it, mastery. How does greatness sound when it whispers? It sounds like sneakers echoing in an empty gym. Long after practice is over, it sounds like batch humming from an old cassette, as the coach rewinds game tape once more. It sounds like a calm voice ending practice with a gentle, well done, instead of a yell. That's where we begin. Here, in this quiet place, amid echoes, not applause. Because if you wish to understand her, you must stop listening for noise and start listening for stillness. Her story does not begin with Stanford, nor with gold medals, not even with her first team. It begins with the hush of a snowy street. A girl with a basketball tucked under her arm, walking home as dusk falls across the small town of Schenectady, and soon we'll go there, to the beginning, to the sound of snow, and to the very first whispers. Of the game. The snow falls like memory, soft, weightless, and slow layering the cracked sidewalks of Schenectady, New York, in a pale hush. In a time before smartphones, before women's professional leagues, before SportsCenter, there walked a young girl beneath flickering street lamps, boots crunching beneath her, a basketball under her arm, and in her coat pocket, a folded page of drawn-up plays. She isn't rushing, not quite dreaming, just quietly thinking. Tara VanDerveer was never loud, not even then. She was born in 1953, in a modest house, nestled between the hum of trains and the steadiness of upstate snow. Her parents, Dunbar and Rita, were educators, people who believed in practice, preparation, and the pursuit of something meaningful. The house was full of music. From the earliest years, Tara was placed in front of a piano, hours of scales, metronomes, etudes, fingers steadying themselves, building discipline in silence. She didn't always love it, but over time, she found peace in repetition. And somewhere between Chopin and Shostakovich, she began to hear the rhythm of something else, a different kind of cadence, the bounce of a ball, the rustle of a net. Basketball found her, not in a crowd, but in the stillness between things. When her family moved for her father's work, one constant remained: Tara bringing that basketball to every new backyard, every cracked driveway, every quiet school gym whenever she could sneak in. She was a tomboy, they said, too competitive, too intense. She didn't care if the boys were playing, she wanted in. If she couldn't play, she'd watch tape reels, fuzzy television broadcasts, announcers talking over grainy footage of Wilt and Russell and Cousy. She mimicked them in shadows, layups under frozen hoops, fadeaways into the wind. When gyms were closed, she'd walk the halls imagining a full-court press, clipboard in hand, drawing inbound plays in the margins of her homework. She wasn't just a fan, she was a student, and while the world around her gently whispered, "That's not for you," Tara answered, with study. She'd already begun to think like a coach, even before she was tall enough to be taken seriously on the court. Her heroes weren't pop stars, they were innovators. John Wooden, Red Auerbach, Dean Smith, coaches with systems, with habits, with ideas that turned games into philosophies. By the time she was a teenager, Tara wasn't just playing, she was leading, organizing neighborhood games, calling timeouts just to teach. Younger kids passing angles, she was the kind to bring a clipboard to the park, the kind to run wind sprints. Alone, she didn't argue. She just got better in school. She was quiet, focused, determined, the kind of student whose notebooks were filled with geometry and half-doodles of zone defenses. Her parents noticed, but they never doubted it. There's a certain kind of parenting that fosters greatness, not by pushing, but by trusting, by letting a spark catch on its own and fanning the flame slowly. They didn't call it Title X back then. In fact, in the world around Tara VanDerveer, there simply weren't many examples to follow. No professional women's leagues, few scholarships. But rather than letting the world define what was possible, she focused on what she could control. Effort, focus, repetition, winter after winter. She returned to the court, to those quiet gyms, half-lit after hours, to the smell of varnished wood and the hum of overhead lights. No crowd, no coach, just the fundamentals. Left hand, right hand, free throws until her fingers ached, and then just the silence, the stillness of a dream in process. She wasn't chasing fame. She was building something deeper, a foundation, a belief that greatness isn't something declared, it's something earned. Layer by layer, she began to see basketball not as a distraction, not as an obstacle, but as an outlet, a place where her mind so analytical, so precise found rhythm and order. A court might be 94 feet of hardwood, but to her it was also music, symmetry, By the time she left high school, Tara had a mind built for coaching. She just hadn't realized it yet, back then. No one told young women their future might be on the sidelines calling plays. But Tara, she had always suspected it, even as she prepared to play at Albany, then transferred to Indiana. She knew. Her eyes searched the court different from the others, not just for the open shot, but for the play behind the play, the patterns buried beneath the chaos. And long before the rest of the world knew her name, she was already listening to quiet laps around gyms, to bounce passes in the dark, to the soft resistance of disciplined solitude. She was listening for the whispers of the game, and the game was beginning to answer. The gymnasium at Indiana was nothing special, cinder block walls, flickering fluorescents that hummed louder than the players, carpeted offices that smelled faintly of old paper and liniment oil. But for Tara VanDerveer, it was a sanctuary, a place to watch, to absorb, to understand. She had arrived at Indiana not just as an athlete, but as a thinker, and there, between drills and midterms, she discovered something deeper than playing. Inside her was a mind that didn't just follow the ball, it mapped it, predicted it, designed its journey. She studied the way plays broke down. She watched footwork like a musician reading notes. She began to diagram offenses, as if composing sonatas, each screen a key, each cut a chord. She was no longer content to simply run a play. She wanted to know why it worked, why it failed, what the pieces meant in motion and in stillness. She knew then she would never be a legendary player, but she might become something else, the one who shapes the court instead of occupying it. Graduation came and went. Quietly, there were no headlines, only a door opening quietly into coaching. Her first role came like most beginnings do, modestly, assistant coach at the University of Ohio. Not glamorous, not loud, but it was hers. And in that place, behind the scenes, she began to carve out who she would become. She watched film not once, not twice, but over and over, until the mistakes conceded their patterns, until the angles revealed their secrets. Sometimes she'd sleep in the office chair, papers scattered like fallen snow across the desk. Other times, she'd go hours without speaking till the rhythm of the game whispered something worth noting. Players respected her not for bluster, not for charisma, but for clarity. She saw the court like a chessboard, each move more meaningful than the last only if the mind behind it remained still. After Ohio came Idaho. Her first time leading from the front. There were no banners, no expectations, just long bus rides, leaky gym roofs, and a clipboard that rarely left her hand. Yet even then, her system began to take shape. Every drill had purpose, every minute had weight. She didn't motivate through volume, she inspired with vision. Her teams ran plays like breath, refined, rehearsed until instinct and intellect were one. She was not chasing wins, she was building habits, because Tara did not believe in luck, only preparation, only discipline. And soon, Ohio State came calling, a bigger platform, more eyes, more pressure, and yet, she arrived the same way she always had, methodical, reserved, focused, at Ohio State. She built slowly, built through basics, through drills that felt monotonous until they became magic. She taught players how to see, not just react, to understand themselves within the system, to trust the process even when the scoreboard disagreed. People began to notice, not because she demanded attention, but because her teams played with uncommon poise, structured, disciplined, in a world that often celebrated flair and fire. Tara's teams moved like clockwork, and though the resume began to grow, wins accumulating, respect swelling, her method never changed. No shortcuts, no gimmicks, no compromises. She studied psychology alongside offense, body language alongside defense. She started keeping journals, not just of plays, but of people, quiet observations scratched in tight, cursive beneath the margins of practice schedules. She wasn't just coaching basketball, she was decoding belief, leadership, balance. Her teams were learning more than sets or switch coverage. They were learning how to think, and Tara, she was learning too. Mastery, she realized, wasn't about knowing everything. It was about returning again and again to the edge of what you already knew, and pushing softly into the unknown. She didn't waste time chasing charisma. She taught that consistency, like a good screen, goes unnoticed to the crowd, but not to those who know the game. And soon, she was quietly becoming one of its finest minds, not because she sought credit, but because she sought truth, the truth of the game, and the truth in herself. There were job offers, whispers of bigger programs, but she didn't rush, because foundations aren't laid in haste. They're shaped, grain by grain, like hands smoothing down pine dot. And so when Stanford called, she was ready, not for the moment, but for the mission to build something lasting, not loud, not temporary, but something whole, the kind of greatness you don't see all at once, you only hear in whispers. When Tara arrived in Palo Alto, Stanford basketball was an idea waiting to take root. The campus shimmered with sunlight and possibility, but women's basketball was a whisper in a corridor filled with louder echoes. She wasn't promised banners, she wasn't given stars, but none of that concerned her, because Tara never relied on promises. She relied on preparation, and from the beginning, she made something clear: discipline would be the foundation. Practices began quietly, no music, no after, just for the sake of it, only the shuffling of sneakers and the focus of minds. She taught players how to pass before they learned how to score, how to guard with their feet, not just their instincts. Each session, a study in intention. Each drill, repeated until movement became memory. She didn't yell, she didn't rant. She corrected with calm precision, a raised eyebrow, a pause, a slight gesture to do it just once. More, but better at first. Recruits were hesitant. Stanford wasn't a basketball school. The academics were tough. The gym sometimes sat half full. But Tara didn't recruit with promises of glory. She offered something more rare: the chance to be shaped not just as athletes, but as thinkers, as people of poise and persistence. And slowly they came. The ones who wanted structure, the ones who craved challenge, the ones who were drawn to her quiet certainty. She built with brick, not flash, with small unnoticed victories. A screen set at the perfect angle. A defender who stayed on her feet instead of biting at a fake dot. Her first seasons were tests of patience. Losses came, but so did learning. And then, the shift, 1990, everything changed. A team that had been molded through years of quiet work caught fire, but not of chance, of design, of long, foggy morning practices, of uncomfortable film sessions, of so many fundamentals the spectacular could suddenly bloom. Stanford became a champion, but even as confetti fell, Tara stood apart. No jumps of joy, just a soft nod, a smile barely visible, as if to say, "We're not done." 2 years later, another title, proof that it wasn't a spark. It was a system, a philosophy, and with that, Stanford was no longer a surprise. They were something more enduring, a standard. She never chased the spotlight that came. Next, she politely declined it, preferring gyms at dawn to galas at dusk. Her idea of celebration. Film breakdown, thinking about how the press needed refining, replaying the final possessions, win or lose. Like notes in a sonata, she knew she could conduct tighter, and though the media sometimes asked for more sound bits, more drama, more terror, she gave them the same thing she gave her players, substance, without noise, beneath her. Stanford didn't just run plays, they solved equations. Players came in unsure, they left, composed by design, by terror, and behind every game was architecture invisible to the untrained eye, but crystal clear to those who listened closely. And what she built there, it didn't shimmer, it didn't shout. It stood calm and strong, like the coach who shaped it. The decision was quiet, like most of hers. In 1995, Tara VanDerveer stepped away, not for rest, not for escape, but for something bigger, something boundless, to take the helm of the US women's national team, to guide it not with spectacle, but with strategy. It had been years since she'd done anything but Stanford. That had been her fortress, her laboratory, her melody. But when the call came to lead the nation, Tara responded, the only way she knew how. With focus, with humility. The team was talented. Mythical names, Lisa Leslie, Don Staley, Cheryl Swoopes, all stars, icons, but talent alone had never impressed. Tara, she believed in cohesion, in rhythm, and in preparing for brilliance. As if it were inevitable even when the stage said otherwise. She began with film. Hours of it, no move left unexplained, no weakness left unnamed. Practices were sharp, planned, measured, not intense with fire, but with form. Every pass had meaning. Every drill was stitched to the next dot. The team noticed this wasn't motivational speeches, this wasn't flair, it was craft. Even the stars began to shift. They leaned into her structure. They felt the steadiness of her vision, the calm she exuded beneath storm clouds of expectation. Over 60 games, over 60 wins, not a single loss. Other coaches might have shouted their way into history, but Tara whispered, and the players, they listened. She didn't need the camera to follow. She needed the system to hold, and it did, beautifully, without cracks. She taught that winning wasn't the goal, it was the outcome of mastery, of repeated excellence, of trust each game fed into. The next dot each opponent met with poise. No panic, no chaos. Even when the noise around them surged, when the expectations became unbearable, the team returned to her voice, even low, firm. Then came Atlanta, the Summer Olympics, a thunderclap of attention. Nations watching, a moment built for extremes. And yet the gold medal game felt no louder, because every movement had already been mapped, practiced, known. When the final buzzer sounded, and the gold was theirs, the celebration was immense. But Tara stood in stillness, not distant, just centered. She handed medals, not as fortunes, but as acknowledgments of preparation. And when the crowd roared, she remained composed, because the goal had never been volume, it had always been execution. Lisa, Dot, Don, Rebecca, all of them would whisper, years later, how she changed them, not with fire but with clarity. She returned to Stanford with no parade, no fanfare, because she hadn't left behind a career. She had brought the experience back with her, folded gently like a note slipped in her pocket. She hung the gold medal in her office, not above her desk, but quietly to the side, visible only to those who looked with intention. Because, for Tara VanDerveer, triumph was not a destination. It was just another waypoint, the quiet path to mastery, and under the canopy of that Olympic glory she returned to her gym, where the echoes waited and the work resumed in silence. Years passed, games, too, one by one, like notes on a staff. Each season began not with predictions, but with practice, always with practice. After returning from Olympic gold, Tara didn't change with the times. She brought her times with her, still composed, still measured, still leaning into the structure she trusted more than hype. Her court in Maples Pavilion was more than a court. It became her symphony hall, and each team a new composition. Jennifer Azzi, a guard like spun silk and grit beneath, a player who breathed her coach's system mantle. She moved like second thought. Then came others, players, whose names would later echo, Nika and Chinny, Ogwimmick sisters rooted in elegance and effort, Candice Wiggins with energy like lightning, but guided into precision. They didn't arrive as stars, they arrived as students, and Tara was the ever-patient composer. She didn't shape them with sermons, she shaped them with silence, with looks, with pens tapping practice logs, with calm repetition. If Stanford was a dynasty, its pillars were not ego or flash. They were footwork, balance, closeouts, backdoor cuts. She rewarded the rotation done half a second earlier. The help defense, you never notice, said Bess. It prevented a drive that never came, daughter. Beauty arrived in details, not in ESPN highlights, but in scoreless quarters, in a box out that felt like music. The world around the game began to change. TV contracts swelled, social media buzzed, spectacle found its way into warm-ups, into press conferences, into recruiting. But Tara resisted the current, held fast to the quiet center of her. Method, no slogans, no branding campaigns, just the game, and year after year, they still came. Not the loudest players, but the ones who longed for clarity, who found safety in structure and purpose in every push of the ball. Her loyalty to the program Beckham, legend. Other coaching offers came, whispers of professional ranks, even interest from men's programs. But she stayed, because leaving would mean abandoning the slow, careful growth she had spent decades tending, not just in players, but in culture. She was often alone late at night, in a darkened film room, watching screens flicker like campfires of memory. She'd rewind possessions 10, 20 times, not to analyze flaws in players, but to search for truth in process. She listened to batch. In those hours, counterpoint and spacing, the same soul behind her drills, order, elegance, patience, patience when a play failed. She didn't scold, she asked, what were we trying to do? A question that hung longer than any diagram. She wanted them thinking more than reacting. Owning mistakes, part of learning, not punishment. Her teams didn't always win titles, but they always knew it. They played, and who they were, and in that, there was a different kind of winning. She read psychology, papers, tracked moments of fatigue and focus, asked players how they felt, not just physically, but quietly. Privately, she knew when to push, and more importantly, when to pull back, because for her, coaching wasn't control, it was listening, not to complaints, but to character. And over time, the wins added like snowfall, each one silent, each one light, and yet, undeniable, the climb continued. More Final Fours, more conference titles, more lines written in the quiet book of legacy. But she never raised her voice. Never asked for a headline. She only asked the same question, season after season, are we getting better? Not louder, not more famous, just better. That was the measure, always. And in the slow harvest of her coaching years, she had begun to grow something rare, not victory, but wisdom, and everyone who played for her knew it, even if they didn't realize it until much later. Even if they couldn't explain it, they'd still feel it, in workouts years after they'd left Stanford. In moments where patience was more valuable than panic, they'd feel Eton courts, and in careers far beyond basketball, the stillness she taught stuck. Carefully, lovingly, forever. The record fell on a quiet winter evening. There were cameras. Yes, journalists lined the press table. Fans held signs in soft reverence. But Tara VanDerveer didn't arrive in that moment any differently than she had arrived 1,000 times before. Early.prepared.com. She greeted each of her players with a nod. Focused, ready. There was no countdown in her voice, no mention of what the night might become. Only the same reminders box: out, rotate, share the ball. For Tara, history was never the goal, only excellence. And so, as the buzzer sounded down, the win was sealed. So too was her place atop the record books. More than 1,200 victories, more than any coach before. A number whispered across the hardwood. While the world finally turned to listen, they offered her flowers, gave her a microphone. But Tara offered only this: I never did it alone. No bravado, no declarations, just gratitude and a glance back toward her team. Because even in that moment, by every right, she handed the spotlight away, as gently as she had handed passes in practice for decades. She thanked her players, her staff, her mentors, her family, and then, with a smile so faint it could have been missed, she slipped away from the noise, back into film, back into future prep, as if the record were just another entry in a ledger of learning. There was no victory lap, no special shoes, no grand threads of social media, only a coach asking, what did we learn tonight? Because for Tara, records didn't define the work defined the records, and quietly they piled up. Win after win, season after season, each one earned not in the game itself, but in the hours before it, on the practice court, in silence, with care, long after others retired. She remained not to chase more numbers, but because her purpose ran deeper than accolades. She stayed because work like this doesn't have a finish line, only fuller versions of the same question: what's next? And what came next was more of the same. Coaching with intention, turning teenagers into leaders, turning fundamentals into poetry. More Final Fours, more conference crowns, more players walking across stage with degrees in hand and purpose in their stride. But still, the world kept asking, when will she stop? And the answer, like most things Tara said, was never shouted, only hinted at. When the time is right, when the program is ready, when I know they can carry it forward. She watched the world of women's sports evolve, watched it demand more respect, more coverage, more justice, and when people asked where she stood, she never needed protest signs. She used her platform as a scaffolding quiet support, steadiness beneath louder voices. She advocated not with speeches, but with example, her life a case studying what investment in women's sports could create. Scholarships given, tens of lives shaped, hundreds of careers launched, thousands of girls watching and seeing, perhaps for the first time, a woman's legacy built in layers deeper than titles. Finally, she announced her retirement, not with a tour, not with headlines trailing her every stop. Just a letter, plain, written with care. She said it was time, that she was ready, that Stanford deserved someone who could give all from the beginning of a new chapter. And again, when the moment was hers to explode into history, she shrank from the spotlight, just as she always had, not from insecurity, not from reluctance, but from truth. She didn't need the praise, she had the impact, and the players bore witness through time. Dozens wrote about her, not about her wins, but about her wisdom, how she made them sharper, more patient, more whole. They told stories not of trophies, but of listening, of learning to think past failure, to cherish progress, more than perfection, one after another. They spoke of standing on her shoulders, even though she never asked for anything but their honest effort. She leaves behind no statue, no catchphrase, no brand, only a standard, coaching as a sacred art, repetition as a gesture of devotion, stillness as its own kind of genius. And those who knew, they heard it, not all at once but in echoes, in the way a young coach runs her huddle now, in the way a former player holds her silence bare, responding with grace. Tara didn't coach basketball, she composed it, and her opus was never a single game, but the culture she built layer by layer, choice by choice, whisper by whisper. And when she stepped off the court for the last time, it didn't thunder, it breathed. Maple's pavilion sits still, the lights are low, the bleachers empty, the echoes at rest. But listen, there it is, a single bounce, then silence. The ball rolls quietly along the sideline, brushing the dust of so many remembered seasons. Every sound sought, reverent, held in the rafters like breath, and between each beat, whispers remain, because Tara VanDerveer may be gone from the court, but she never really left. She lives in the systems, in the footwork taught 1,000 times, in the unglamorous decisions that win games because they are built to. Her fingerprints are not on statues, but in pauses, before timeouts and huddles, disciplined by habit, not panic. When a young coach kneels before her team, voice steady, words chosen, that's Tara. When a player says, we, before me, because she was taught that basketball is more than performance, that's Tara. She changed basketball, not all at once, but cell by cell. She made the process holy, made wake up calls feel like invitations, turned breakdown drills into a kind of prayer, grounded in rhythm, in respect, in repetition. They'll talk about her numbers, but they'll remember her presence, the way she met pressure with posture, the way she looked at a mistaken not with scorn, but with curiosity. She didn't correct to control, she correct her to unlock, and those she taught, they carry her, quiet in boardrooms, in clinics, in long car rides, where they explain to their own daughters why the boring parts matter. They'll tell them about the coach who never raised her voice, but raised the bar, whose brilliance wasn't a spotlight, but a steady lamp, left on so others could find their way. Her greatness didn't arrive in declarations. It arrived slowly, one back door cut at a time, one film session past midnight, one choice. Do it again until it was right in this world that often demands immediacy. She stood for patience. She resisted the pace, and in so doing, she built something that lasts longer than trend, than title, than time. Now, the court is quiet again, just the hum of the lights and the memoria footsteps worn into the floor. But listen closely, and she's still here, in every young woman unafraid to lead, in every coach who believes teaching is an act of care, in every athlete who knows that mastery lives not in celebration, but in execution. What does greatness sound like when it whispers? It sounds like a dry erase marker, scraping slowly through a new play, like laughter after the last sprint, like words of encouragement shouted, but heard fully because they were earned. It sounds like tradition passed from hand to hand, like stillness that cuts through clamor. This is what she gave the game, a legacy too large to hold all at once, a standard carried forward inning by inning, quarter by quarter, season by season. And those who walk the court now, they not walking alone. They step where she once stood, where she once taught, where she once looked a player in the eye and told her, you can. Not in slogans or headlines, but in presence and in practice. VanDerveer may never have demanded our focus, but now we offer it, because in the noise of the world, she taught something deeper, that real greatness wears no crown, only a whistle and a watchful eye and a notebook filed with notice that sound, even now, like the whispers of the game.